2 centuries have passed ever since the abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, where it was no longer accepted to use humans for trade and to exploit them in such a manner. Why? Because it goes against 3 basic human rights: freedom, equality, and justice. However, we see that unfortunately different forms of slavery are still being practiced today, where these 3 basic elements of human rights are compromised. So much so that in many ways, slavery today is much worse than the slavery of the past. The renowned Harvard sociologist Orlando Patterson, a specialist in the history and sociology of slavery, defines slavery as the permanent, violent, and personal domination of natively alienated and generally dishonored persons. Moreover, a slave is not necessarily a tradable property, but as Patterson defines it, a slave is someone who lives in a condition of dishonor and his livelihood is reluctantly dependent of the will of a master. Striking parallels are seen with modern-day slavery and the continuous oppression of the Palestinian people. Here's a few examples. Number 1. Slaves are the object of physical torture and punishment, and their everyday life is in danger at the hands of their master or oppressor. The number of Palestinians that have been arrested and detained by the Zionist oppressors in Israel since 1967 to this date is astounding. The lack of adult male figure as breadwinner in the family due to imprisonment has largely impacted families and caused them to suffer on a daily basis. As for those who are not incarcerated, they live in a state of constant fear and threat of imprisonment or being killed. The Israeli NGO Public Committee Against Torture has affirmed that once arrested, hundreds are categorized as serious threats and are violently mistreated to a standard that is even prohibited by international law. This includes being bound to chairs for hours, held in isolation, verbally and physically abused and humiliated. Gazan civilians are also often used as human shields after being taken as hostages and using them for Israeli military purpose, while threatening their families if they don't cooperate with the Israel Defense Forces. Number 2. Slavery is a state where one does not have access to citizenship, and therefore is deprived of security that a person should be provided as a member of a community and living in a land governed by law. The illegal establishment of Israel in 1948 meant the loss of home and citizenship for the Palestinians. The loss of citizenship of the Palestinians due to the unjust occupation is a form of slavery and a serious blow which should not be taken lightly. Number 3. Slavery is when a person is unfairly governed by a different legal system than the average common person, and usually not given the same fair treatment or trial as the free person. The law is made to cater towards the ruling group, to exonerate them when convenient, and to be harsh on those enslaved by this system. We continue to see Palestinians being subject to a harsh legal system which is applied to them only, and not to the other Israelis. If a Palestinian child is suspected of throwing stones at a soldier, the Israel Defense Forces gunman attacks his home at night, kidnaps him, and tortures him. He is not even given the chance to defend himself. Yet if an Israeli is suspected to do the same, it is likely that nothing will happen. In fact, it is rare for a Palestinian to get a non-conviction verdict, even for petty crimes. They are also deprived from proper legal protection. Number 4. Slaves are used to maintain the property of the master, yet they are denied their right to acquire or expand on personal property. Israel has made it impossible for Palestinians to own or expand property, with many of their buildings demolished, causing them to get displaced. Even slaves get better treatment and are given shelter. They are often also used in labor to serve the interest of the Zionists. Number 5. Slaves have limited freedom and cannot travel as they wish to explore better opportunities and improve their state of living. Talk about a lack of freedom when it comes to slavery. Is it not slavery when since the 1990s, Israel has imposed severe restrictions on Palestinian movement in the West Bank, with numerous checkpoints making it very inconvenient and difficult to travel? This feeling of spatial imprisonment is accompanied by economic strangulation. As part of the Israeli domination tactics, they made it very difficult for Palestinians to be independent from them. Palestinians are restricted from building their own businesses and are forced to work in Israeli settlements, the very land which they own and was taken from them. What a humiliating thing. Today, the Palestinians continue to be enslaved by the corrupt Zionists who serve as their masters with no mercy whatsoever. We all have a role to play in bringing slavery to an end. How? It starts with us identifying the root cause of the problem, Zionism and all its puppet supporters who have been the source of the ongoing corruption we see worldwide, and which expands way beyond the Gaza Strip. Zionists must be held accountable for all the atrocities that continue to this day globally, such as in Yemen, Bahrain, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Nigeria, Myanmar, and Kashmir, just to name a few. Don't watch silently. Be the voice of the oppressed and call for justice. Remember, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.